Myself Dr. S. MOHAMED NAZEER. This class I am going to teach you microeconomics. In microeconomics, interest. What is interest? Interest is the reward paid by the borrower of capital to the lender of capital for the use of his capital. I repeat, interest is the reward paid by the borrower of the capital to the lender of capital for the use of his capital. The follower of the liquidity preference theory of interest believe that interest is the price for surrendering liquidity preferences. Still, to others who accept the loanable fund theory of interest hold that interest is the price paid for the use of loanable funds. Simply, interest is the reward paid by the borrower of the capital to the lender of capital for the use of his capital. Now, definition of interest. According to Marshall, interest is the price paid for the use of capital in any market. Keynes defines interest as the premium which has to be offered, induce people to hold their wealth in some form other than hoarded money. These are the definitions of economics. Now I am going to explain kinds of interest or types of interest. There are two kinds: gross interest, net interest. Let's see one by one. Gross interest. Gross interest is the total amount received by the creditor from the debtor. Gross interest include net or pure interest, insurance against risk, the compensation for inconvenience, wages for management, etc. So gross is included of what? Insurance against risk, compensation for inconvenience, wages for management, and pure interest. Included this we can call that is the gross interest. Now net interest. Net interest is the only a part of the gross interest. Net interest is the only a part of the gross interest. It is payment for the use of capital only. It is the residual left with the capitalist after deducting the insurance against risk, the compensation for inconvenience, wages for management, etc. from the gross interest. Net interest also called pure interest or economic interest. So these are the kinds of interest, gross and net interest. Now I am going to explain the theories of interest. The first theory, the abstinence theory or waiting theory. This theory was propounded by Senior. According to him, interest is reward for abstaining from the immediate consumption of wealth. I repeat, interest is the reward for abstaining from immediate consumption of wealth. According to Senior, capital is a result of saving, but saving involves abstinence or sacrifice. Postponing the consumption is called abstinence, okay, or sacrifice. It is possible to save only if one abstinence from present consumption. Such abstinence from present consumption involves some suffering. Hence, it is necessary to reward the saver. Say, who is saver? Capitalist. To compensate for the sacrifice he has to undergo by abstaining from present consumption. Therefore, interest is a reward or compensation paid to the saver, that is capitalist, for his abstinence or sacrifice. Marshall accepted abstinence theory of interest, but he used the word waiting instead of abstinence. Saving implies waiting. According to him, interest is the reward for waiting. Saving involves waiting, but people do not like to wait. So, in order to make them wait and in turn to save, we have to pay them some reward. Therefore, interest is the reward paid to the saver for his waiting. Okay, this is the Marshallian view. So here Marshallian used the word waiting instead of abstinence. Criticism of this theory. According to this theory, saving involves suffering, but saving do not always involve suffering to rich people. Okay. Number 2. Another criticism is that if a man saves and simply waits, he cannot get interest. A man simply saving and wait, he cannot get interest. In other words, this theory does not take into account productivity of the factor in the determination of interest. These two are the criticism of this theory. Now, the next theory of interest, the agio theory of interest, or the psychological theory of interest. According to this theory, people prefer present goods than future goods. People prefer present goods than future goods because the present goods are more valuable than future goods. Just as a bird in a hand is worth two in the bush. Okay, a bird in a hand is worth two in the bush. So when people save, they have to postpone their enjoyment of satisfaction. But generally, people do not like to postpone their present enjoyment or satisfaction. If you want to them postpone their present satisfaction, you have to pay them agio or premium. This premium is called interest. Okay. People prefer present consumption than future consumption for the following reasons. They lack imagination and cannot visualize the future wants. Number 2, they feel that present wants is more keenly than the future wants. That is, future is uncertain. Number 3, present goods possesses a technical and a superiority over the future goods. Criticism of this theory. This theory emphasizes only the supply side and it ignores the demand side. Therefore, it is a one-sided theory. Okay. Now I am going to explain the time preference theory. This theory was propounded by Irving Fisher. According to Fisher, people have the time preferences. They prefer the present satisfaction than the future satisfaction when both are equal amount and they are equally certain. This is called time preference. People want to spend the current income in the present, but if they save, they cannot enjoy in the present. On account of these time preferences, a person is impatient to spend his income immediately. So interest has to be paid to overcome the time preference. So interest has to be paid to overcome the time preference. Thus, interest is the price for time preferences. There is a direct relationship between the time preferences and the rate of interest. The greater the time preferences, the greater the rate of interest and vice versa. Now, criticism of this theory. This theory emphasizes only the supply side and it ignores the demand side. Therefore, it is a one-sided theory. The second criticism. This theory considers that supply of capital depends upon saving only. It ignores the impact of the banking system. These are the criticism of time preference theory. Now I am going to explain the marginal productivity theory of interest. According to marginal productivity theory of distribution, price of any factor is equals to marginal productivity of that factor. This is also applicable when in capitalist. So according to marginal productivity theory of interest, interest is equals to the marginal productivity of capital. So interest is the equals to the marginal productivity of capital. Criticism. Criticism of marginal productivity theory of distribution is applicable to this theory also. Now I am going to explain the classical theory of interest. The classical theory of interest or the saving and investment theory of interest. The classical theory of interest was propounded by the old classical economists. But credit goes to Marshall, Pigou, Walras, etc. According to this theory, the rate of interest is a payment for saving. Rate of interest is a payment for saving. Therefore, the rate of interest determined by demand for saving. Demand for saving and the supply of saving. So, rate of interest determined by demand for saving and supply of saving. That is why this theory also called demand and supply theory of interest. So demand for saving and supply of saving determine the rate of interest. That is the reason this theory is also known as demand and supply theory of interest. This theory assumes that there is a direct relationship between rate of interest, saving and investment. The classical theory of interest also called real theory of interest because it seeks to explain the determination of rate of interest by real factors such as real savings, real investments, thriftness, time preferences, and productivity of capital. So I repeat, because it seeks to explain the determination of rate of interest by real factors such as real saving, real investment, thriftness, time preferences, productivity of capital. Now, demand for saving. Demand for capital is nothing but demand for saving. Demand for capital implies demand for saving. Demand for saving is a derived demand or indirect demand. The demand for saving from firms which desire to invest, that is to say, the purchase of capital goods. Capital is demanded because its productivity. Demand for saving also depends upon the marginal productivity of capital. Now, supply of saving. The supply of capital depends upon saving. The supply of saving in turns depends upon factors like level of income of the people, standard of living, economic and political conditions, family affection, etc. However, the most important factor is the rate of interest. If the rate of interest is high, the supply of saving will be higher and vice versa. If the rate of interest will be high, the supply of saving will be high and vice versa. That is the reason why the supply curve of capital rises from upward, from left to right. Saving is a direct function of the rate of interest, and investment is an inverse function of rate of interest. See, look here, if rate of interest is high, saving will be high. Okay, and rate of interest is low, investment will high. So that is the reason inverse function between investment and rate of interest. Saving and rate of interest direct function. Okay, this diagram explains the equilibrium of rate of interest. The diagram x-axis represents the demand and the supply of savings and y-axis represents the rate of interest. Okay, II is the investment demand curve. SS is the supply of saving curve. They intersect each others at point E is the equilibrium point. At this point, OR is the rate of interest. OM is the savings are supplied and demanded. Now, criticism of demand and supply theory of interest. This theory assumes that there is a full employment, but in real life, there is unemployment or underemployment equilibrium. This theory neglects the effect of investment on level of income. When the rate of interest rises, investment falls. The third criticism, saving not only depends upon the rate of interest, but also on other factors like time preferences and liquidity preferences. The fourth criticism, when we consider the supply of capital, we must also take into account of bank credit. This theory neglects the bank credit. This theory assumes that when there is a fall in rate of interest, there will be an increase in demand for capital for investment purpose. But during the depression, the rate of interest may be low, but there is no investment. The sixth criticism, Keynes criticized that equality between saving and investment brought about by changes in level of income but not only by rate of interest. Okay. The seventh criticism, this theory assumes that more investment can occur only by reducing consumption. If consumption is reduced, the demand for consumer goods will come down, and it will adversely affect the demand for capital goods. So this will result in investment. This is called the inverse working of multiplier. Okay. The eighth criticism. Keynes also points out that one can get interest by lending money which has not been saved by him but has been inherited. Okay. So these are the criticism. Inherited means family. The father and father is giving money to him, the son, and son is giving to his son. So that money he is lending the money, but he is not saving. It is called inherited. So the interest is one can get the interest by lending money which has not been saved by him, but it has been inherited. Now I am going to explain the loanable funds theory, or the neoclassical theory of interest. The loanable funds theory, also known as neoclassical theory, was developed by Swedish economists like Wicksell, Bertil Ohlin, and others. This theory is an improvement of the classical theory of demand and supply theory of interest. The classical theory, saving referred to saving out of current income only. But in loanable fund theory, saving includes not only savings out of current income, but also bank credit. I repeat, according to classical theory, saving referred to saving out of current income only. But in the loanable fund theory, saving includes not only saving out of current income, but also bank credit, dishoarding, and disinvestment. In classical theory, saving was demanded only for investment. But according to loanable fund theory, the funds were demanded not only for investment, but also for consumption and hoarding. According to this theory, interest is the price paid for the use of loanable funds. I repeat, interest is the price paid for the use of loanable funds. The rate of interest is determined by the equilibrium between demand for and supply of loanable funds in the credit market. Now, demand for loanable funds. The demand for loanable funds depends upon the following: demand for investment, demand for consumption, demand for hoarding. Let's see one by one. Demand for investment. The most important factor responsible for the demand for loanable fund is the demand for investment. Bulk of the demand for loanable funds comes from the business firms which borrow money and purchasing capital goods. The demand for loanable funds for investment purpose is interest elastic. More capital will be demanded at a lower rate of interest. Lower rate of interest, more capital demanded. Higher rate of interest, less capital demanded. Okay. Therefore, the demand curve for investment slopes downwards from left to right. This is called the interest elastic. Now, demand for consumption. The next demand for loanable funds comes from individuals who borrow money for consumption purposes. When individuals wish to make purchase in excess of their current income, they demand loanable funds. If the rate of interest is low, people will borrow more loanable funds for consumption. So the demand curve for consumption slopes downwards from left to right. Now, demand for hoarding. The next demand for loanable funds comes from hoarding. Demand for hoarding money rises because people's preferences for liquidity, that is to say, idle cash balances. The demand for hoarding money is interest elastic. That is to say, if rate of interest low, people will demand more money for hoarding. So the curve of the demand curve of hoarding is sloping downwards from left to right. These are the demand side. Demand for investment, demand for consumption, demand for hoarding. Now, supply of loanable funds. The supply of loanable funds depends upon the following four sources, namely saving, bank credit, dishoarding, and disinvestment. Let's see one by one. Saving. Saving done by individuals and households are the most important source of loanable funds. According to loanable fund theory, saving may be two types, namely saving planned by individuals, which is called ex-ante saving. Saving planned by individuals, which is called ex-ante saving. Number two, the unplanned saving, which is called ex-post saving. The supply of saving, the saving will slopes upward from left to right. Okay, the first source of loanable funds is saving. The second one is the bank credit. The bank credit is another source of loanable funds. Commercial banks create credit and supply of loanable funds to the businessmen and industries for investment. Generally, bank will lend more money at a higher rate of interest. Therefore, the supply curve of bank credit will also slope upward from left to right. The saving curve also sloping upward from left to right. Now, dishoarding is another source of loanable funds. Dishoarding means bringing out of the hoarded money into use, and thus it constitutes a source of supply of loanable funds. Dishoarding occurs when rate of interest become higher. Dishoarding occurs when rate of interest become higher. The past saving, hoardings, idle cash balances will come available for investment. When people dishoard, the ideal cash balance become active cash balance in the present period and add to the supply of loanable funds. The supply curve of the dishoarding will also upward from left to right. Now, disinvestment. Disinvestment is the opposite to investment. In other words, disinvestment means not providing sufficient funds for depreciation of investments. It takes place only when revenue of the firm is not used for replacement of fixed capital. Disinvestment is higher when the rate of interest is very high. The supply curve of disinvestment also slope upward from left to right. The equilibrium. The rate of interest is determined by equilibrium between the demand and the supply of loanable funds. This can be explained with the help of a diagram. In this diagram, x-axis represents the demand and supply of loanable funds. Y-axis represents the rate of interest. Y-axis represents the rate of interest. The LS curve represents the total supply curve of loanable funds. LS curve is the total supply of loanable funds, which is obtained by the total of saving curve. Total of saving curve, which is obtained by total of saving curve, bank credit BC, dishoarding curve DH, and disinvestment curve DI. The LD curve. The LD curve represents the total demand for loanable funds, which is obtained by the total of the demand for investment curve, that is DI, okay, the demand for consumption curve DC, the demand for hoarding curve DH. The LD and the LS curve intersect each other at point E. Okay, this is the equilibrium point. At this point, OR is the rate of interest and OM is the amount of loanable funds are demanded and supplied. Now I am going to explain Keynes' liquidity preference theory of interest, or the monetary theory of interest. Keynes propounded the liquidity theory of interest in his famous book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. According to Keynes, interest is purely a monetary phenomenon because the rate of interest is calculated in terms of money. That is the reason Keynes said that interest is purely a monetary phenomenon. According to him, interest is the reward for parting with liquidity for a specified period. Keynes rejected the classical view of rate of interest as the reward for saving or waiting as such. The classical economist believed that saving was influenced by the rate of interest, but according to Keynes, saving depends upon level of income. Of all assets, money is most liquid asset, and people prefer a liquid form of asset. Therefore, if they are asked to surrender this liquidity, they must be rewarded. This reward is interest. According to Keynes, greater the desire of liquidity, higher shall be the rate of interest. A man with a given income has to decide first how much of his income he is going to consume and how much to save. The former will depend on what Keynes calls the propensity to consume. Given this propensity to consume, he will save a certain proportion of given income. So I repeat, given calls propensity to consume. Given this propensity to consume, he will save a certain portion of his given income. This will depend upon what Keynes called the liquidity preference. Now, meaning of liquidity preference. Liquidity preference means the preference of the people to hold wealth in the form of liquid cash rather than non-liquid assets like bonds, securities, bills of exchange, land, building, gold, etc. According to Keynes, there are three motives for liquidity preference. They are the transaction motive, precautionary motive, and the speculative motive. Let's see one by one. The transaction motive. The transaction motive relates to the desire of the people hold the cash for the current transactions. That is to say, day-to-day expenditures. Number two, the precautionary motive. The precautionary motive relates to the desire of the people to hold cash to meet unexpected expenditure such as sickness, accidents, fire, theft, and unemployment. Third one is the speculative motive. The speculative motive relates to the desire of the people to hold cash in order to take advantage of market movements regarding the future changes in the price of bonds and the securities in the capital market. In order to get benefit from the capital market, people will hold some amount of money. This is called speculative motive money. Now, determination of interest. Of these three motives, speculative motive is more important in relation to rate of interest. According to Keynes, the rate of interest is determined by the demand for money and the supply of money. In fact, liquidity preference for speculative motive determines the rate of interest. The demand for money is liquidity preference. The supply of money is determined by the policies of the government and the central bank of the country. The total supply of money consists coins, currency, and bank deposits. This can be explained with the help of diagram. In this diagram, LP is the liquidity preference curve. LP is the liquidity preference curve, that is the demand curve. M2 is the supply curve of money, okay, to satisfy the speculative motive. Both curve intersect at point E, the equilibrium point, hence the rate of interest is OI. If liquidity preferences increases from LP to L1, P1, the supply of money remains constant. The rate of interest rises from OI to OI1. This is increase in liquidity preference on the rate of interest. Now I am going to explain equilibrium between the demand and the supply of money. Here, LP is the demand for money is the constant. If the supply of money OM2, the supply of money is OM2, the rate of interest is OI2, and the supply of money is reduced from OM2 to OM3. The interest has increased from OI2 to OI3. Okay. If the supply of money increases from OM to OM4, the interest has reduced from OI2 to OI4. This is the way interest is determined by demand and supply of money. Now, criticism of this theory. Keynes considered interest purely as a monetary phenomenon, but rate of interest is not purely a monetary phenomenon. He ignores real factors like productivity, weighting, and time preferences. According to Keynes, interest is the reward for parting with liquidity for a specific period, but some critic pointed out that interest is not a reward for parting with liquidity but for productivity of capital. In this theory, the term liquidity has not been clearly defined. Keynes makes the rate of interest independent of the demand for investment funds. It is not so independent. This demand is investment funds depends upon the marginal revenue productivity of capital. Okay, these are the criticism of the theory. Now I am going to explain the neo-Keynesian theory of interest or the modern theory of interest. The classical theory considered only the real factors such as saving and investment determines the rate of interest, and the Keynes theory considers only the monetary factors such as liquidity preference and money supply. Demand for money and the supply of money determines the rate of interest. Modern economists have considered both the real and the monetary factors. The economists like J.R. Hicks and Hansen have made a synthesis between these theories and have given an adequate and determinate theory of interest. The modern theory of interest has successfully integrated the four factors: saving and investment, demand for money, and supply of money. According to modern theory, there are four determinants of rate of interest. They are saving function, investment function, liquidity preference function, and the supply of money function. Okay, determination of rate of interest. Modern theory has evolved two curves, namely IS curve and LM curve. IS curve shows the equilibrium in the real sector, and LM curve shows the equilibrium in the monetary sector. LM, liquidity for money, supply of money. IS, investment and saving. Okay, both are equal. That is called general equilibrium. So at this equilibrium rate of interest, both the real and the monetary sector are in equilibrium. At this rate, total saving will be equals to total investment, and total demand for money will be equals to total supply of money. This can be explained with the help of diagram. In this diagram, x-axis represents income and y-axis represents the rate of interest. The IS curve and LM curve are relating to two variables, namely income and rate of interest. These two curves intersect each other at point E. This is the equilibrium point, hence the rate of interest is OR and the level of income is OM. At this point, income and the rate of interest stand in relation to each other such that investment and saving are equilibrium and the demand for money and the supply of money are equilibrium. It should be noted that LM curve has been drawn by taking in the supply of the money as fixed. Okay, I repeat, it should be noted that the LM curve has been drawn by taking the supply of money as fixed. Here, the modern theory of interest consider both real and monetary term. Real term, investment and saving. Okay, monetary term, demand for money, supply of money. So here, the saving and investment equal and demand for money and saving for money, demand for money and supply of money equal. This both the saving and investment and demand for money and supply of money equal. That is called general equilibrium. At this point, this level is income, this level is the rate of interest.